They say some stories should never be told, because once you hear them, they follow you. In the darkness, when the world is quiet, that's when they come back. Memories, shadows, voices without bodies. These are not bedtime stories. These are the whispers of the dead, the screams trapped inside walls, the fear that breathes behind you. Every story you hear tonight was born from pain, from madness, from something that refused to die. Once you start listening, there is no turning back. Turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and welcome to the darkness. Don't forget to like our videos. Also, subscribe our channel.
I didn't die on the highway. That's the first thing you want to say when you tell the story, because it's the part that makes people stop listening to the rest. They hear that and their eyes change. They start filing you into categories: dramatic, unstable, attention-seeking. They decide you're exaggerating. So let me say it properly. I should have died on the highway, and the next day still happened anyway. When I woke up, the first thing I noticed was the sunlight. It came through the blinds in narrow stripes, bright enough to make the dust in the air look alive. The ceiling fan above me turned at its usual lazy pace, clicking once every rotation, the same tiny mechanical complaint I'd been ignoring for months. Everything was familiar in the way your own home is familiar. So familiar that your brain stops seeing it unless something is wrong. That's how I knew something was wrong, because my body felt finished. Not rested, finished. Like every tired muscle had been replaced overnight. Like the small aches I lived with had been edited out. I lay still for a long time, waiting for pain to catch up to me, waiting for the delayed punch of reality. Nothing came. The absence of pain felt unnatural, like waking up to find gravity had been politely turned down. I sat up slowly and listened. Traffic outside, distant, steady, a neighbor's door closing, a dog barking once. Normal. Too normal. I swung my legs off the bed and stood. The floor was cold. I felt it sharply, clearly, the way you feel cold when your nerves are awake and honest. For a second, I almost relaxed. Then the memory hit. Not a full memory, a flash. Rain, headlights, something pale standing in the road where nothing should be standing. Then metal and weightlessness, and a sound like the world tearing. My stomach turned. I stumbled into the bathroom and gripped the sink. The mirror showed my face under the harsh light. Same scar on my chin from a childhood fall, same uneven eyebrow, same tired eyes. I leaned closer. For one impossible moment, my reflection didn't move when I moved. It wasn't dramatic, not like a horror movie. It was subtle, like a streaming video buffering, my face lagging behind the expression I'd made. Then it caught up. I blinked hard. "Get a grip," I whispered. The voice that came out was mine, and it sounded normal. That bothered me more than the reflection. I made coffee because it was what I always did. Routine is the first tool people reach for when reality feels unstable. If you can repeat a morning, you can pretend the day belongs to you. The coffee machine gurgled. The smell filled the kitchen. I waited for comfort. It didn't arrive. The smell was right, but it didn't land in me. It hovered, like my senses were receiving data, but my mind wasn't assigning meaning to it. I poured the coffee anyway. I took a sip. Hot, bitter, real. I set the mug down and tried to breathe. That's when the phone rang. I froze with my hand still near the cup. No one called that early. Not my family, not my coworkers, not the few friends I still kept half contact with. If my phone rang in the morning, it meant something had gone wrong. It rang again. I stared at the screen. Unknown number. I should have ignored it. I answered. "Hello?" Silence. Then breathing, measured, controlled, like someone making sure I was truly on the other end. A woman spoke. "You answered." Something in my chest tightened. "Yes," I said. "Who is this?" A pause. "That's good," she said. "That means today still matters." "What does that mean?" I asked, sharper than I intended. "You don't remember," she said. "I remember plenty," I lied. Another pause, long enough that I could hear the faint hiss of distance on the line, like she wasn't calling from far away, but from somewhere thin. "Then you remember dying," she said. The word landed like a weight. "I didn't die," I said, too quickly. "I'm standing in my kitchen." "Yes," she replied softly. "That's the problem." "Who are you?" I demanded.
She didn't answer. Instead, she said, "Don't drive today." Then the line went dead. I stared at the screen until it dimmed. My coffee sat untouched, steaming. Outside, a car passed by. Normal day sounds, normal day motion, and inside me a cold certainty began to form. Someone else knew something about my life that I didn't. I didn't go to work. Not because of the call, though that was part of it, but because I couldn't stop replaying the flash of rain and headlights. I tried to force the memory into a clean timeline. Where had I been driving? Why had I been out so late? Why couldn't I remember the minutes leading up to the impact? My mind slid off those questions like they were coated in oil. I sat on my couch and opened my laptop. My fingers hovered over the keys, searching for something to do, something that would feel productive and tethering. I checked the news, nothing relevant. I checked my email, normal. I checked the weather from last night, rain in the region, moderate storm, no severe warnings. I searched for accidents on the highway, nothing with my name, nothing that matched what I remembered. That should have relieved me. It didn't. Around noon, I finally went outside because staying inside made the walls feel too close. I told myself I'd just walk to the corner store and buy something small, something stupid, a bottle of water, a snack, just to prove the world still interacted with me normally. The sun was warm. The air smelled like dry pavement and spring, and people looked at me differently. Not everyone, but enough that I noticed. A woman watering her plants glanced up at me, then looked away too quickly. A man checking his mailbox stared for half a second too long, then frowned like he'd seen someone he couldn't place. It was subtle, but it built. By the time I reached the crosswalk at the main road, I felt like a wrong note in a familiar song, something that didn't belong but everyone could hear. The crosswalk signal was red. Cars flowed past. I waited. The light stayed red longer than it should have. A young guy beside me, hoodie, headphones, shifted impatiently. He looked at the signal, then at the road. "Come on," he muttered, stepping forward as if to cross anyway. A hand touched his shoulder, not mine. An older man, gray hair, tired eyes, had reached out calmly and stopped him. "Wait," the older man said quietly. The young guy shrugged him off. "It's fine." The older man leaned closer and said something I couldn't hear. The young guy went still. He stepped back. Both of them looked at me. Not in a normal "who is that" way, in the way people look at a pothole they almost didn't see, like I was an accident waiting to happen. The light turned green, but the cars didn't move. Not immediately. Drivers stared straight ahead, hands locked on steering wheels, like they were waiting for permission. The whole intersection held its breath. I crossed quickly, heart hammering. Halfway across, I felt something, a thin pressure at my back, like a fingertip between my shoulder blades. Not touching, directing, urging me to move faster. When I reached the other side, the traffic started again as if a switch had flipped. The noise returned. The world resumed. I stood on the sidewalk sweating and wondered what I had just walked through. At the store, the cashier didn't meet my eyes. "Didn't see you come in," he said, voice casual. "I walked in," I replied. He forced a laugh that didn't match his face.
"Yeah, sorry, long day." He handed me my change without letting our fingers touch. I noticed then that he placed a small strip of tape over the edge of the counter, bright red tape,
like a boundary line. He saw me looking. "It helps," he said quietly. "What helps?" I asked. He swallowed. "People don't drift as much." I left without pressing him. Outside, the sun felt slightly colder. That evening, I tried to call my own phone from my laptop. It rang. No weirdness, no unknown voice, just my ringtone in my pocket. Still, when I answered, I listened for a second for that measured breathing. Nothing. I hung up and sat in silence. At 9:17 p.m., my doorbell rang. I froze. I wasn't expecting anyone. I approached the door quietly and looked through the peephole. No one. The hallway was empty. I opened the door anyway, just a crack. Nothing. Then, as I stood there, I heard it. Not outside. Inside the walls. A faint knock. 3 taps. My skin went cold. I shut the door and locked it. The lock clicked, then clicked again by itself, softer, like something had tested it. I backed away. The knocks didn't repeat, but the silence afterward was full of meaning. It felt like a reminder, like something saying, "We know where you are now." The woman called again at 11:11 p.m., unknown number again. I stared at it for a full ring before answering. "Hello?" Breathing. Then her voice, calm as a doctor delivering a diagnosis. "You shouldn't have gone outside today," she said. "I didn't agree to anything," I said. "I know," she replied. "You never do at first." I swallowed. "What happened to me?" I asked. Silence stretched. Finally, she said, "Some people die, and some people miss it." My throat tightened. "Miss it how?" I whispered. "You were supposed to stop," she said, "but you kept going." The flash of the highway came back stronger, rain whipping sideways, headlights catching pale stillness in the road, my hands wrenching the wheel. "I didn't choose that," I said. "No," she agreed, "but now you're here anyway." "Here where?" "In the next day," she said, "the one you don't belong to." The words made my stomach twist. "How do I belong?" I asked. "You don't," she said simply. "That's why you're noticeable." My mouth went dry. "Who are you?" I demanded again. She ignored it. "Whatever you do," she said, and for the first time her voice carried urgency, "don't fall asleep tonight." The line went dead. I stared at my bedside clock. The numbers glowed softly. 11:12 p.m. Then the display flickered and froze. The seconds stopped blinking. Time, at least that small measured time, stopped behaving. I sat on the edge of my bed, fully dressed, shoes on, lights on, as if I could keep myself anchored with readiness and brightness. Midnight came without the clock acknowledging it. Then in the quiet, the wall beside my bed tapped again. 3 taps, and this time the taps felt closer than the wall. They felt like they were coming from the air itself, like someone knocking on the inside of the room. I stood, suddenly dizzy. The floor seemed to tilt slightly, like gravity had been nudged. My eyelids felt heavy. Not natural heavy, assisted. I remembered the woman's warning and forced my eyes wide, forcing my body to keep moving. I paced, I drank water, I washed my face. The sleepiness rose anyway, thick and sudden, like fog filling a room. I began to understand what the next day really meant. It wasn't a gift, it was borrowed time, and something wanted its payment. If you're still with me, here's what you need to know before we go further. The next day doesn't behave like a normal day. It behaves like a hallway between days, and if you fall asleep in it, you don't wake up where you think you will.
I didn't fall asleep that night, not because I was strong, because the day wouldn't let me. Sleep circled me the way a tide circles a drowning swimmer, slow, inevitable, patient. Every time I thought I'd pushed it back, it surged again, heavier than before, dragging at my thoughts, my balance, my sense of where I was standing. I learned quickly that the next day doesn't want you unconscious, it wants you unfinished. Sometime after the clock froze, and after minutes stopped behaving like minutes, I realized my apartment had changed. Not dramatically, not enough that I could point to one thing and say, "There, that's wrong."
The walls felt closer, not moving, just attentive. I paced the living room, then the kitchen, then the hallway back to my bedroom. Each time I passed the same spot near the doorframe, a wave of dizziness hit me hard enough that I had to grab the wall. That was when I saw the tape. A thin strip of red tape stretched across the bottom of my front door, perfectly straight, like someone had carefully measured it. I stared at it, my heart pounding. I hadn't put that there. I crouched and touched it with one finger. Cold, solid, real. As I watched, a second strip appeared on the wall beside the door, slowly, deliberately, like ink seeping through paper from the other side. I jerked my hand back. The strip finished forming, then stopped. It didn't grow, it didn't pulse, it just existed. A boundary. I backed away until I hit the couch. "That's new," I whispered. The apartment didn't respond, but the pressure in the air eased slightly, like something had taken note. I tried to sit. That was my second mistake. The moment my body stopped moving, the heaviness returned full force. My thoughts slowed, sticking together like wet pages. Images bled into one another. My bed, the road, the pale shape in the headlights, the crosswalk where no one moved until I did. I felt myself tipping forward, my chin dropping toward my chest. "No," I muttered, forcing myself to stand. The room swayed. I stumbled toward the bathroom, splashed water on my face, and stared into the mirror. My reflection looked thinner, not physically, existentially, like I was slightly transparent, edges blurred, as if the world hadn't finished rendering me. Behind me, reflected faintly in the mirror, the red tape on the doorframe pulsed once, a warning. I turned around. It was still. The first sleep attack came without ceremony. One moment I was standing at the counter, gripping it with both hands, breathing hard. The next, my vision narrowed violently, tunneling inward as if someone had grabbed the edges of my awareness and pulled. Sound dropped away. I felt myself falling sideways, and then I was somewhere else. I was standing in my apartment, but it wasn't my apartment. The layout was the same, but everything was wrong by inches. The ceiling was lower. The walls were a shade too pale. The furniture felt slightly out of proportion, like it had been copied from memory instead of measured. The lights were on, every light. They buzzed faintly, casting a flat, shadowless glow. I looked down at my hands. They were solid, but when I moved them quickly, they left faint after images, like a slow shutter speed. I turned slowly, my heart pounding. Every doorway in the apartment was open, including the one that shouldn't have been. The hallway beyond my bedroom stretched far longer than it ever had, lined with doors that all looked exactly like mine. I took a step back.
The hallway took a step forward. I felt it then. Something like gravity, but directional. A pull that wasn't toward the floor, but toward stillness. "Don't stop," I whispered to myself. A voice answered, "You always say that." I spun around. A man stood in my kitchen doorway, mid-30s, dark circles under his eyes, clothes rumpled like he'd slept in them for weeks. He looked familiar, not in the way you recognize a face, in the way you recognize a feeling. "You shouldn't be here yet," he said calmly. "Where is here?" I asked. He smiled weakly. "Close enough to the end," he replied. My chest tightened. "Who are you?" "Someone who missed it," he said, "like you." I glanced toward the hallway. The doors were closer now. "You fell asleep," he said, noticing my fear. "Just for a second." "I didn't mean to," I said. "None of us do," he replied. I stepped toward him. The pull intensified. The man raised a hand. "Don't cross the tape," he said. I looked down. A thin red line ran across the kitchen floor, right between us. I hadn't seen it before. "Why not?" I asked. "Because it marks what's still yours," he said, "and what isn't." My throat went dry. "What happens if I cross it?" He hesitated, then said quietly, "You finish dying." The hallway doors creaked in unison. The pull surged. I staggered backward, fighting it with everything I had. "I didn't die," I said. The man nodded. "Exactly," he said. "That's the problem."
I woke up on my kitchen floor, gasping, my hands numb from gripping the counter. The lights were still on, the red tape was still there, and my body felt heavier than it had before, like something had been added to me instead of taken away. I checked the clock. It was blinking. 12. Then it reset. Time resumed. The next day, a real day, had begun. I sat there, shaking, trying to understand what had happened. I hadn't slept, not fully, but something had pulled me sideways anyway. That was when I understood the rule I'd been missing. In the next day, rest is enough. You don't have to sleep, you just have to stop resisting. The phone rang again around dawn. This time I answered immediately. "You didn't tell me about the hallway," I said. The woman sighed softly. "You weren't supposed to find it yet," she replied. "Who was the man?" I demanded. "One of the almost finished," she said. "And me?" "You're still pending," she replied, "which makes you dangerous." I swallowed. "How long do I have?" I asked. A pause. "Until you stop moving," she said, "or until something else decides to help you." "That's not comforting. It's not meant to be," she said. Before hanging up, she added, "They're watching you more closely now." The line went dead. By morning, my apartment looked normal again. No tape, no buzzing lights, no sense of pressure. If I hadn't felt the weight in my bones, the deeper exhaustion that didn't go away, I might have convinced myself it was all stress. But when I stepped outside, I saw it. On the sidewalk, on the curb, on the edge of the street, thin red lines, faint everywhere, like the world had been quietly divided while I wasn't looking. And standing across the street, watching me with tired, knowing eyes, was someone else who didn't quite belong to the day.
I didn't cross the street, not right away. The person standing there didn't wave or gesture or try to get my attention. They just watched me with the same wary stillness I'd seen in the man from the hallway, the look of someone who knows that sudden movement can make things worse. A woman this time, early 40s maybe, hair pulled back too tightly like she hadn't bothered to fix it properly in a while. She stood just behind a red line painted faintly into the concrete at the edge of the road, toes careful not to cross it. Cars passed between us. None of them slowed, none of the drivers looked at her, or at the red line. That was the part that finally convinced me this wasn't just in my head. I stepped back toward my building. She mirrored the movement, stepping back in the same direction on her side of the street, keeping the distance exactly the same. "Okay," I muttered, "you're real." Her mouth twitched slightly. "That's generous," she said. Her voice carried easily across the road, though traffic should have drowned it out. "Most days I don't feel like it." I swallowed. "What do you want?" I asked. She glanced down at the red line near her feet, then back at me. "To see if you'd notice," she said. "That means you're not finished yet." The word landed hard. "Neither are you," I replied. She nodded once. "Not for lack of trying," she said. We didn't meet in the middle. That would have been a mistake. Instead, she waited until the traffic thinned, then walked parallel to me down the block, staying on her side of the invisible division. It felt like walking beside a reflection in a window, close, familiar, unreachable. "My name's Mara," she said eventually. I told her mine. She repeated it quietly, like she was testing whether it still fit me. "When did you miss it?" she asked. "Last night," I said. "Highway. Rain." Mara winced. "Roads get a lot of us," she said. "They're very convincing." "Convincing of what?" I asked. She thought about it. "That it's easier to stop than to keep going," she said. I glanced down. A red line curved across the sidewalk ahead, subtle enough that anyone else would have stepped right over it without noticing. I stopped short. Mara smiled faintly. "Good," she said. "You're learning." "What happens if I cross?" I asked. Her expression darkened. "Depends how tired you are," she said. "Depends who's watching." We reached a small park at the end of the block. The paths were quiet, damp from last night's rain, benches empty except for fallen leaves and a single coffee cup someone had abandoned. Mara stopped at the edge of the path.
"I can't go further," she said. "Why not?" She pointed. The red lines were thicker here, intersecting, forming a loose grid across the park entrance. They glowed faintly, like embers under ash. "This is a resting place," she said. "People stop here without realizing it, sit down, close their eyes." "And then?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "And then they finish," she said. I felt the pull immediately, a subtle pressure in my chest, a suggestion more than a command. The bench looked comfortable, inviting. The air felt heavy with the promise of relief. I stepped back. The pressure eased. "Who puts the lines there?" I asked. Mara shrugged. "No one," she said, "or everyone. It's like condensation, where enough people almost stop, the boundaries form." I thought of the tape at the store counter, the line in my apartment, the tape others used instinctively without understanding why. "They don't see them, do they?" I asked. "No," she said, "not unless they're close." "Close to what?" She met my eyes. "Close to the end." We sat on opposite sides of a red line near the park, careful not to cross.
I didn't turn around. That was the rule I hadn't been told yet, but somehow already knew. Turning around meant acknowledging the invitation. It meant letting the next day believe I was considering its offer, and once it believed that, it would stop asking politely. The smile in the microwave reflection widened anyway. Not mine, not quite human. I reached forward and opened the microwave door hard, breaking the reflection apart with a dull clack of plastic and metal. The kitchen light flickered, then steadied. The knocking stopped. For a few seconds, there was only the sound of the faucet running and my own breathing, ragged, uneven, real. I shut the water off. Silence settled in like dust. I slept standing up that night. Not fully, not well. I leaned against the kitchen counter with my feet planted just inside the red line that curved around the room like a lazy question mark. Every time my knees buckled or my head dipped, the pressure returned, heavy, persuasive, reminding me how easy it would be to just slide down onto the floor. Each time I forced myself upright. Sometime near dawn, I heard movement in the hallway outside my apartment. Not footsteps, dragging, slow, uneven contact with the floor, like someone pulling weight they no longer fully owned. I pressed my ear to the door. Through the wood, I heard a voice whispering, not words exactly, but the shape of them, a murmur that carried comfort, reassurance, the promise of rest. I stepped back. The red line at my door brightened faintly. Whatever was outside didn't cross it. Eventually, the sound faded. Morning came in layers, not all at once. Light crept under the blinds. The pressure eased. The red lines thinned until they were barely visible. I was still there, barely. By the third day, the rules began to emerge on their own. Rule 1, stillness attracts attention. Rule 2, fatigue makes the boundaries visible. Rule 3, if something invites you to rest, it is not doing so for your benefit. Rule 4 came later. I learned it the hard way. I went back to work. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. You learn quickly that explaining this kind of thing makes you sound finished even when you aren't. People stop looking at you like a person and start looking at you like an ending. Still, my coworkers noticed. "You look better," one of them said, frowning, "but also worse." I smiled because that's what people expect. At my desk, I kept moving. I typed, stood, paced, found reasons to walk to the printer on the other side of the office. The building felt wrong. Too many corners, too many places to lean, to pause, to sink. Near noon, I noticed the tape, red, thin, placed carefully along the edge of the break room counter. No one commented on it. No one questioned why it was there. They stepped around it instinctively. I watched a woman reach for her coffee mug, hesitate just before crossing the line, then adjust her stance without ever looking down. She didn't see it, but something in her did. That was when I realized the lines weren't new. They'd always been there. I just hadn't been close enough to see them. At 2:17 p.m., someone finished.
I didn't turn around. That was the rule I hadn't been told yet, but somehow already knew. Turning around meant acknowledging the invitation. It meant letting the next day believe I was considering its offer. And once it believed that, it would stop asking politely. The smile in the microwave reflection widened anyway. Not mine, not quite human. I reached forward and opened the microwave door hard, breaking the reflection apart with a dull clack of plastic and metal. The kitchen light flickered, then steadied. The knocking stopped. For a few seconds, there was only the sound of the faucet running and my own breathing, ragged, uneven, real. I shut the water off. Silence settled in like dust. I slept standing up that night. Not fully, not well. I leaned against the kitchen counter with my feet planted just inside the red line that curved around the room like a lazy question mark. Every time my knees buckled or my head dipped, the pressure returned, heavy, persuasive, reminding me how easy it would be to just slide down onto the floor. Each time, I forced myself upright. Sometime near dawn, I heard movement in the hallway outside my apartment. Not footsteps, dragging, slow, uneven contact with the floor, like someone pulling weight they no longer fully owned. I pressed my ear to the door. Through the wood, I heard a voice whispering, not words exactly, but the shape of them, a murmur that carried comfort, reassurance, the promise of rest. I stepped back. The red line at my door brightened faintly. Whatever was outside didn't cross it. Eventually, the sound faded. Morning came in layers, not all at once. Light crept under the blinds. The pressure eased. The red lines thinned until they were barely visible. I was still there, barely. By the third day, the rules began to emerge on their own. Rule 1, stillness attracts attention. Rule 2, fatigue makes the boundaries visible. Rule 3, if something invites you to rest, it is not doing so for your benefit. Rule 4 came later. I learned it the hard way. I went back to work. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. You learn quickly that explaining this kind of thing makes you sound finished, even when you aren't. People stop looking at you like a person and start looking at you like an ending. Still, my coworkers noticed. "You look better," one of them said, frowning, "but also worse." I smiled, because that's what people expect. At my desk, I kept moving. I typed, stood, paced, found reasons to walk to the printer on the other side of the office. The building felt wrong. Too many corners, too many places to lean, to pause, to sink. Near noon, I noticed the tape, red, thin, placed carefully along the edge of the break room counter. No one commented on it. No one questioned why it was there. They stepped around it instinctively. I watched a woman reach for her coffee mug, hesitate just before crossing the line, then adjust her stance without ever looking down. She didn't see it, but something in her did. That was when I realized the lines weren't new. They'd always been there. I just hadn't been close enough to see them. At 2:17 p.m., someone finished.
His name was Daniel. I only knew that because I'd worked with him for 3 years and never once thought about the fact that he was always tired. He sat 2 desks over from me, quiet, polite, the kind of person who apologizes when someone else bumps into them. That afternoon, he stood up suddenly, swaying slightly. "You okay?" someone asked. Daniel laughed. "Yeah," he said, "just need to sit down for a second." He took 1 step backward, right over a line I could see clearly. It flared bright red. Daniel's shoulders relaxed, his face smoothed out, the tension draining away like water from a sink. "Oh," he said softly, "that's better." I was already on my feet. "Daniel," I said sharply, "don't—" He looked at me, confused but calm. "Don't what?" he asked. The office noise dimmed around us, like the room was politely stepping back. People kept typing, phones kept ringing. No one else noticed what was happening.
The red line thickened beneath Daniel's shoes, his outline blurred. "Hey," he said, frowning slightly. "I feel weird." I reached for him. My hand passed through his arm like it was moving through cold mist. Daniel gasped, not in pain, but surprise. Then he smiled, relief, pure and unfiltered. And then there was nothing where he'd been standing, just empty space. A second later, a chair rolled backward as if someone had stood up too fast. Someone laughed nervously. "Where'd Daniel go?" a voice asked. No one answered. By the time HR announced he'd left early, my hands were shaking too badly to type. That night, the woman called again. "You saw it happen," she said. "Yes," I replied. "That makes you more noticeable," she said. "I tried to stop it." "I know," she replied. "That's why you're still here." I closed my eyes. "Why do some people miss it?" I asked. "Why not everyone?" She was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, "Because the world needs witnesses." My stomach turned. "Witnesses to what?" "To the cost of stopping," she said. "To the fact that rest isn't always recovery." I thought of Daniel's smile. "I don't want this," I said. "No one does," she replied. "But you're awake, and once you're awake, you don't get to choose ignorance again." "Then what do I choose?" She hesitated. "Movement," she said. "Connection. Interruption." A pause. "And when you can't manage that anymore," she added, "you choose who you don't let finish alone." The line went dead. That was the night I heard it clearly for the first time. The helpers. They don't look like monsters. They don't need to. They sound like concern, like kindness, like someone who understands how tired you are. As I lay on my couch, sitting upright, lights on, body trembling with exhaustion, I heard a knock at the door. 3 taps, gentle, familiar. A voice followed, not through the door, through the room. "You've done enough," it said softly. "Let someone else hold the weight now." My eyelids burned. The red lines brightened, circling me slowly. The voice smiled. "You don't have to disappear," it said. "You just have to stop moving." And for the first time since the accident, I wasn't sure I could refuse. The voice stayed with me long after the knocking stopped. Not a sound, as weight. It pressed into my thoughts the way humidity presses into skin, subtle at first, then unavoidable. Every idea I had felt slower, thicker, like it had to push through something dense before it could exist. I understood then why people finished, not because they wanted to vanish, because the effort of remaining became unbearable. The helpers didn't appear right away. That's another thing people misunderstand. They don't rush you. They don't chase. They wait for the exact moment when resistance starts to feel selfish, when continuing begins to feel like stubbornness instead of survival. I felt that moment approach sometime after midnight. My legs trembled, my back ached, my thoughts looped uselessly. I had exhausted distraction, exhausted movement, exhausted willpower. I sat on the edge of the couch, careful not to cross the red line curling beneath my feet. The room felt full, not crowded, occupied. "You've carried it long enough," the voice said again, closer now. "You don't have to be a witness forever." I clenched my fists. "What do you want from me?" I whispered. Silence. Then another voice answered. "Balance." This one sounded different, less personal, less intimate, like something used to speaking to many people at once. The lights dimmed slightly, not flickering, just settling into a softer glow. "You missed your ending," the voice continued. "That creates tension. Tension demands resolution." "I didn't ask for this," I said. "No," it agreed, "but you were chosen." My stomach turned. "For what?" "To anchor," it said. The word landed with a heaviness that sank into my chest. I didn't sleep that night either, but I did rest, just for a second, and that was enough. I woke up standing in the middle of a wide room I didn't recognize. No, recognized but hadn't seen before. The architecture was familiar in the way public buildings are familiar. Clean lines, neutral colors, nothing meant to draw attention. Rows of chairs filled the space, all occupied. People sat motionless, eyes closed, heads tilted slightly forward like they were listening to something distant. None of them were asleep. I knew that immediately. They were finished. A thin red line ran down the center of the room like an aisle. I stood directly on it. That felt significant. At the far end of the room, a wall of glass revealed something impossible. The city. Not my city. Every city. Streets overlapping streets, highways threading through buildings, intersections layered over intersections. Cars moved in perfect silence, flowing without friction or collision. No accidents, no delays, no exhaustion. "This is what happens when people stop," the voice said behind me. I turned. There were 3 of them now. Not bodies, presences. Human-shaped in the loosest sense, like silhouettes cut out of light and shadow.
"You're showing me a lie," I said. They didn't deny it. "It's a simplification," one replied. "The world cannot afford infinite motion." "Then slow it down," I snapped. "Fix it!" Another presence tilted its head. "That's not your function," it said. My hands trembled. "Then what is?" "To hold the gap," the first said, "between stopping and going, between finishing and continuing." The room hummed softly, the sound of a million tired sighs layered together. "You anchor the next day," it said, "so others don't have to." I looked at the people in the chairs. "They're gone," I said. "They're resolved," the presence corrected. "And me?" "You're unresolved," it said. "That makes you valuable." Anger surged through my exhaustion. "You're using us," I said. "Yes," it replied calmly, "because you're still capable of caring." I felt it then, the pull, not toward rest, but toward responsibility. The helpers weren't just easing people into endings. They were maintaining the world by removing friction, by erasing the tired, by turning human exhaustion into infrastructure. "You can't keep doing this," I said. "We already have," it replied, "for longer than you've measured time." I thought of Mara, of Daniel, of the man at the bus stop, of myself standing in the kitchen fighting to stay upright. "If I refuse?" I asked. The presences leaned closer. "Then the weight returns to everyone," one said. "Accidents increase, collisions, delays, pain. And if I stay? You remain," it said, "between days, holding what others can't." The red line beneath my feet brightened. I felt myself thinning again, edges blurring. "You don't have to decide now," the voice said gently, "but you will." The room began to fade. "Movement or meaning," it whispered. "Choose." I woke up on my apartment floor, gasping. Morning light spilled through the windows. My phone buzzed beside me. A text message. "Unknown number. Someone finished on your block last night. We felt it from here." I sat up slowly. My body ached in a way it hadn't before. Real pain, grounding pain. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance. Traffic honked. The city felt louder, heavier, more human. I smiled weakly. I'd done something. I didn't know what yet, but the next day felt unstable, and for the first time since I missed my death, that felt like hope.
The sirens didn't stop. They multiplied. By mid-morning, the city sounded like it used to. Raw, impatient, alive in the way people forget is dangerous. Horns blared, voices rose in frustration. Somewhere nearby, glass shattered, followed by shouting. Normal chaos, human chaos. My hands were still shaking when I stood up. The ache in my muscles felt earned, not imposed, and that difference mattered more than comfort ever could. The phone buzzed again. Unknown number.
You disrupted a load point. I stared at the message. What does that mean? I typed back. The reply came immediately. You shifted weight you were never meant to carry. I swallowed. Good, I typed. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Anchors aren't supposed to resist, the message finally read. I felt something cold slide through my chest. So that's what I am? I typed. An anchor? This time the response took longer. You were, it said. Now you're unstable. I didn't go back to work. That felt like another rule I was breaking without being told, and I was done pretending rules existed to protect me. Instead, I walked. Not fast, not slow, just enough to keep myself in motion. I passed the bus stop where Mara had mentioned the man finishing. The bench was empty. No red lines lingered there now, only a faint smudge on the concrete, like a shadow that hadn't decided whether to stay. People waited for the bus as usual. One woman rubbed her eyes, exhaustion written plainly across her face. A man leaned heavily against the glass shelter, shoulders sagging. I watched carefully. Nothing happened. No lines, no pull. For the first time since the accident, I felt something loosen inside me. The world wasn't correcting itself, it was adjusting. I found Mara again that afternoon. She was sitting on the steps of a closed library, just outside a boundary she could clearly see, but no one else could. She looked worse than when I'd last seen her, paler, thinner, like the next day had been feeding on her resistance. You felt it too, didn't you? She said as soon as she saw me. Yes, I replied, the weight shifting. She laughed softly. They're panicking, she said. I didn't think they could. I sat beside her, careful not to cross the line. What happens now? I asked. Mara stared straight ahead. Anchors break, she said, or they get replaced. My stomach dropped. Replaced how? She turned to me, eyes tired but sharp. They let someone else miss it, she said. Someone younger, someone more flexible. I thought of the tired faces I'd passed, of people on highways, in hospitals, in offices, one bad night away from stopping. We can't let that happen, I said. Mara smiled sadly. That's what makes you dangerous, she replied. The helpers didn't knock that night. They didn't whisper. They didn't invite. They waited. And waiting, I learned, was worse. The pressure built without direction, without persuasion, like the atmosphere before a storm that never quite breaks. Red lines flickered in and out of existence across my apartment, forming and dissolving, uncertain of where to settle. I understood then. They didn't know where I belonged anymore. At 2:03 a.m., my phone rang. Not an unknown number this time, a blocked one. You're destabilizing the system, the woman said without preamble. You're murdering people quietly, I replied. A pause. We're preventing collapse, she said. By erasing the tired, I shot back. By stealing rest and calling it balance. Another pause. Longer. You don't understand scale, she said. Then teach me, I said. Silence. When she spoke again, her voice was colder. If anchors refuse, she said, the next day spreads. I felt a chill. What does that mean? It means more people miss their deaths, she said. More unfinished, more boundaries, more instability. That sounds like freedom, I said. It sounds like chaos, she replied. I thought of the sirens, the noise, the pain, the life. Maybe chaos is what happens when you stop smoothing everything down, I said. The line went dead. I slept that night. Really slept. For 4 full hours. And I dreamed of roads. Not endless ones, but intersections. Crossings where people hesitated, chose, turned back. I woke up exhausted. And still alive. Outside, the city was louder than it had been in years. Accidents happened, arguments happened, people were late, people were angry, people were here. The next day didn't feel stable, but it felt honest.
And somewhere beyond the edges of the city, the helpers were realizing something they'd forgotten. The world doesn't end when people stop finishing. It just becomes harder to control.
The first failed replacement happened on a Tuesday. That detail matters because Tuesdays are nothing days. They don't carry the weight of Mondays or the promise of Fridays. They're the kind of day people drift through without noticing how tired they are until it's too late. I felt it before I saw it, a sudden tightening in the air, like someone pulling a thread too hard. The red lines across the city flared briefly, then scattered, unsure where to settle. I stopped walking mid-block, my chest tight. "They're trying," Mara said beside me. She'd started staying closer. Movement worked better that way. Pairs disrupted patterns. The helpers hated unpredictability. "Trying what?" I asked, though I already knew. "To make a new anchor," she replied. We followed the feeling, not physically but intuitively, like bloodhound instincts that weren't ours to begin with. It led us to a hospital on the edge of downtown, the kind with fluorescent lights that never fully turn off, and hallways that always smell faintly of antiseptic and fear. The helpers loved hospitals. So much stopping happened there. We didn't go inside. We didn't have to. The red lines were everywhere, curling around benches, tracing door frames, clustering thickest near the emergency entrance. I could feel the pull radiating outward, focused, deliberate. "They've picked someone," Mara said quietly. Through the glass doors I saw him, a teenager, maybe 17, sitting slumped in a plastic chair, hoodie pulled tight around his face. His leg was bandaged, blood soaking through gauze. His phone lay forgotten in his hand, screen dark. Exhaustion poured off him like heat. "They can't," I whispered. "They already have," Mara said. I stepped forward instinctively. The line beneath my feet burned. "Wait," she said sharply, grabbing my arm. "If you cross now, they'll finish him faster." I froze. Inside, a nurse spoke to the boy, her lips moving. He nodded weakly. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor beeped steadily. The red line beneath his chair thickened. His shoulders relaxed. I felt a sudden, terrible clarity. He was feeling better. That's how it always starts, relief first. The helpers weren't visible, but I could sense them, clustered, attentive, leaning in. I did the only thing I could think of. I stepped backward, hard, deliberate, breaking the line under my feet. The pressure snapped like a rubber band. Inside the hospital, the boy jerked upright, gasping as if he'd been dunked underwater. The red line beneath his chair fractured, splintering outward like shattered glass. Alarms went off. Nurses shouted. The helpers recoiled, not in pain but confusion. Mara stared at me. "You just pulled wheat off him," she whispered. The boy started crying, not quietly but openly, terrified and alive. The line dissolved completely. Replacement attempt failed. We didn't stay. You never stay after breaking something that important. By the time we reached the street, my phone was vibrating non-stop. Blocked numbers, unknown numbers, calls I didn't answer. Finally, a message came through. "You don't understand consequences." I typed back with shaking hands. "Try explaining them without lying." The reply came slower this time. "Anchors distribute exhaustion. Without them, it concentrates." I swallowed. "So people feel worse," I typed. "That's your threat?" "So systems break," the message replied. "So accidents rise." "Accidents already rise," I typed. "You just hide them better." Silence. Then, "You can't save everyone." I stared at the screen. "I'm not trying to," I typed. "I'm trying to stop you choosing who disappears." The dots appeared, vanished, appeared again. "Then you'll have to choose something else," the message read. Before I could respond, the phone went dead. No signal, not just no bars, nothing. That night, the city shook, not literally, conceptually. Traffic snarled into gridlock, power flickered in several neighborhoods, people snapped at each other in grocery lines, arguments flared over nothing. Fatigue was surfacing everywhere at once, no longer siphoned away. "This is what they meant," I said, watching the chaos from my apartment window. Mara nodded. "This is the cost," she said. "Life without quiet erasure."
I felt the weight pressing down again, stronger than before, unfocused, indiscriminate. "You okay?" she asked. I shook my head. "No," I said honestly, "but I'm here." She smiled faintly. "That's enough for now." The knocking returned around midnight. Not 3 taps this time, many, all around, on walls, on windows, on the floor. The helpers weren't asking anymore. They were checking structural integrity. "Don't answer," Mara said softly. "I won't," I replied. We stood back to back in the center of the room, red lines circling us like a broken compass. Outside, the city roared with frustration and motion. Inside, the pressure mounted. And for the first time, I understood what staying alive now truly demanded. Not endurance, participation.
By Thursday, the red lines were failing. Not vanishing, failing. Fraying at the edges, appearing where they shouldn't and disappearing where they were needed most. The world looked the same to everyone else, but to us, the unfinished, it felt like walking through a map that no longer trusted its own borders. The helpers felt it too. That was when they stopped pretending the next day was optional. The first collapse happened at an intersection downtown. A simple 4-way crossing, no history, no meaning, until 12 unfinished people arrived at the same time. None of them planned it. They were drawn there the way iron filings are drawn to a magnet, by shared strain, shared resistance, shared refusal to stop. I arrived seconds before it broke. Cars idled at the lights, pedestrians waited. Everything was poised for normalcy. The red lines flared violently across the asphalt, intersecting, overcorrecting, trying to separate bodies that no longer wanted to be separated. A helper manifested, not as a voice, as stillness. The entire intersection went quiet. Engines died mid-rev, wind stopped, even birds froze mid-air like they'd forgotten how to fall. The helper spoke through every soundless mouth at once. "This ends now." People felt it, not consciously, but deeply. A wave of sudden calm washed through the crowd. Shoulders relaxed, knees softened. Relief, the most dangerous sensation of all. I felt myself being pulled toward the center of the intersection, toward the thickest convergence of lines. "Don't!" Mara shouted, grabbing my arm, but the helper was faster. It pressed into us, not pushing, not pulling, reducing, compressing possibility until only one option felt reasonable: stop. I understood then. The helpers weren't guardians, they were editors, and we were text that had grown too messy. The next day surged outward from the intersection like a shock wave, not erasing people, replacing moments. People arrived at destinations without remembering the drive. Conversations ended without anyone recalling the last sentence. Arguments resolved without anyone knowing why. Time smoothed itself. Human friction vanished, and exhaustion dropped everywhere. The world felt better.
That terrified me. "This is it," Mara said, voice tight. "This is their last move. Their overriding choice," I said. "Not just finishing people, finishing days." The phone rang. Blocked number. "You can't stop this," the woman said calmly. "We learned." "Learned what?" I asked. "How to remove anchors without creating replacements," she said. "How to erase resistance itself." My hands shook. "What happens to us?" I asked. Silence. Then, "You become anomalies." That night, the unfinished gathered in silence. No coffee shops, no movement rhythms, just proximity. We stood on rooftops, in empty parking lots, on bridges overlooking moving water, places where stopping felt impossible. The helpers pressed in from every direction. The air thickened. Stillness tried to settle. "This is the choice," Mara whispered. "They're forcing it." I felt it too. The next day was expanding, trying to become permanent. A world without exhaustion, without hesitation, without friction, without humanity. "We can't fight this," someone said quietly. I stepped forward. "Yes," I said, We can. They looked at me. How? Someone asked. I took a breath. By doing the one thing they can't edit. I stepped across a failing red line and stopped. Not to rest, to choose. The pressure slammed into me like a wall. My vision blurred. My bones screamed. I stayed. Every instinct begged me to finish. I didn't. The moment stretched, thin, dangerous, absolute. The helpers screamed, not in sound, in error. The intersection system buckled. Time hiccuped. The next day cracked. When I opened my eyes, I was alone. Morning light filtered through clouds that looked ordinary. The city sounded tired again, real tired. Cars stalled, people argued, sirens wailed. Exhaustion had returned, but choice had returned with it. The phone buzzed one last time. No number, just a message. You broke the continuity. I smiled weakly. Good, I whispered. I don't know what happens next. The helpers are gone, or hiding. The next day still exists, but it's smaller now, localized, temporary. People still miss their deaths sometimes, but not quietly, and never alone. If you're listening to this because you feel it, because the world has gone flat around you and stopping sounds tempting, remember this: rest is human. Stopping forever is not. Keep moving, but don't do it alone.
The helpers stopped whispering after that night. They stopped knocking politely, stopped offering comfort dressed up as concern. Subtlety had been a luxury, and I'd made it too expensive to maintain. What came next was pressure, without pretense. By Wednesday morning, unfinished people were finding each other without meaning to. Not through messages, not through calls, through recognition. You see it in the eyes first, people who look a fraction out of phase with the world around them. Not depressed, not dissociated, just misaligned, like their internal clock skipped a beat and never corrected. I saw 3 of them on my walk to meet Mara. A man pacing in tight circles near a parking garage, muttering under his breath as if repeating instructions. A woman standing too close to the edge of a subway platform, rocking gently, eyes unfocused but alert. A delivery driver who kept starting his truck, then turning it off again, unable to decide which motion mattered more. None of them crossed lines. Not yet. They were hovering, waiting. "They're clustering," Mara said when I told her. We were sitting on opposite sides of a painted curb, the red boundary between us faint but present. "That's new." "Is it bad?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. "It means the next day is learning," she said finally. The phrase made my skin prickle. Learning how? How to persist without anchors, she said, or how to make new ones that won't fight back. The helpers made their move that afternoon, not with voices, with absence. Hospitals began reporting strange gaps, patients who simply weren't where they were supposed to be, with no records of discharge or transfer. Security footage showed people standing up from beds, smiling faintly, and then skipping. Not vanishing, skipping frames. 1 second present, the next gone. No blur, no distortion, as if reality had decided not to render them anymore. The news called it a systems error. I called it finishing without witnesses. "They're bypassing us," I said. Mara nodded grimly. "They don't need anchors if they can erase people mid-motion," she said. The weight surged again, sharper now, jagged. I felt it in my teeth, in my joints, like the world grinding itself down without lubrication. "Then what are we for?" I asked.
She looked at me. "We're proof," she said, "that stopping isn't inevitable." The first gathering happened by accident. A coffee shop downtown, one of those places designed to encourage loitering. Soft chairs, low music, the smell of roasted beans and safety.
5 unfinished people ended up there at the same time. None of them knew why they'd chosen that place, but when one of them started to drift, eyes closing, shoulders sagging, the others felt it like a tug on shared nerves. "Don't," someone said sharply. The word snapped the air. The red lines that had begun to form under the chairs wavered, then thinned. They stayed, together. I arrived just in time to see it. The helpers did too. I felt their attention like a heat lamp. "This isn't allowed," one of the unfinished whispered. "No one said it wasn't," another replied. I stepped inside. Movement surged through the room, not panic, but awareness. Everyone looked up at once, not at me, at each other. "You feel it too," I said quietly. They nodded. Exhaustion hummed between us like static. "Good," I said. "That means you're still here." Outside, the windows fogged rapidly, though the air wasn't cold. The helpers were pressing in. "They don't like this," Mara said, appearing at my side. "No," I agreed. "They like us isolated." The pressure increased, red lines thickening, curling inward, trying to separate us. I took a breath and did something that felt both reckless and obvious. I sat down, not to rest, to anchor motion. I tapped my foot, stood up, walked the length of the room, sat again, stood again. The others followed. Movement spread like a rhythm, subtle, continuous. No one stopped long enough to sink. The red lines flickered wildly. The helpers recoiled. For the first time since I missed my death, I felt something like triumph. That night, the woman called again. Her voice was strained. "You're accelerating the spread," she said. "Good," I replied. "You don't understand what you're creating," she snapped. "The next day isn't meant to scale." "Neither was exhaustion," I shot back. Silence. Then, quietly, she said, "If too many people refuse to finish, the boundary dissolves." "And?" I asked. "And then no one rests," she said, "ever." I thought of the city, angry, loud, alive. I thought of Daniel's smile. "Maybe rest shouldn't be mandatory," I said. She hung up without another word. I didn't sleep that night. None of us did. Across the city, unfinished people stayed awake together, in cafes, on rooftops, in parks that no longer felt safe to sit in. The red lines thinned everywhere. Traffic accidents rose, so did laughter. Arguments happened, so did reunions. The world was louder, messier, real, and somewhere beyond the edge of perception, the helpers were realizing a truth they'd spent centuries avoiding. You can't manage humanity by erasing its fatigue. You can only decide who gets to be tired together. Before you go, look around the room for a moment. The story may have stopped here. If any of these stories stayed with you, you're not alone. Comment below the moment that made you pause, the part you can't stop thinking about, or the timestamp that felt too real. And if you don't want to face nights like this alone, subscribe now. New true horror stories every night, longer, darker, and closer to home. Turn off the lights, keep the volume low, and check your surroundings one last time. Good night.